Greetings! Let's get the camera adjusted a little bit here. Look a little silly off in the corner. Hopefully my projector doesn't screw things up. By the way, I have a terrible setup. I'm very rarely looking at the camera when I talk, so I apologize for that. All right, I'm gonna wait for a few more people to arrive. This is supposed to kick off at 9 o'clock, and I will go ahead and get that started in a moment. In the meantime, I'm gonna go back to my main layout so you don't have to look at me just sitting here being a fat dude on film. All right, almost 9 o'clock. All right, gonna start in just a moment. Actually, you know what? Let's get going. All right, so for all of you who are here joining us, thank you so much. My name is Mike Espinos. I am an educator. I've been an educator for enough years that I can't think of how many years it's been off the top of my head. At least around 8 or 9 years. I am also an IT professional in education. But beyond that, I have been a gamer for, well, I've been a gamer for at least, God, I don't know. I want to say since I was 14, maybe. So, yeah, yeah. Going on, God, 25 years now. I started in second edition D&D. Um, in case you're curious, I was playing a goblin shaman in a party, and actually, I have a feeling the DM didn't like me because he kept encouraging the party to use me as a, well, I guess the only thing I could say was a test dummy. Have you ever seen have you ever seen Mythbusters? I was essentially Buster. They threw me through everything to see what would happen. That kind of inspired me to run a podcast called How Do I DM, which has been on hiatus since I lost my co-host, and I've been trying to get that back up and running. So if you're interested in co-hosting, please let me know. I know it's a little weird, but so yeah, it's not like you're doing anything else during this lockdown, right? Also, fun fact: since the last time I did this, I am a COVID-19 survivor, so go me. I don't know what to say with that. But yeah, so how do I DM kind of comes from the fact that a lot of people have a misunderstanding about a DM's role when it comes to gaming and what that means. The DM's role is a is often viewed as an adversarial role with the players, and that is not necessarily always the case. There are some games where that's intentionally the case. If you're running Tomb of Horrors, the DM's role is a bit adversarial. It's part of the fun. So you got to understand that overall concept of when you're playing, what your role is, and that's kind of why I run things like How Do I DM. I joke because it's a beginner's guide to ultimate power, which as a DM you have ultimate power. But one of the things that you need to remember is that that ultimate power can be used for good or evil. So that being said, I'm going to talk to you guys. By the way, if you have a question at any time, or if you need to tell me to slow down, because that is something I'm terrible at, please make sure that you go ahead and you put that in the chat for this, because that's something I might need to hear. Now, with that, let's go to my main disclaimer. First off, don't engage in digital piracy or theft of copyrighted works. This is important. Not just if you're going to be putting your game on Twitch or if you're going to be doing something fun where it's going to be putting it out there, but in general, just don't do it because we get more of what we love, more modules, more things being created, more books, more resources, more tools when we pay for what we get. So please, please, for the love of bacon, don't engage in digital piracy or theft. Pay for what you're using. Um, that being said, the first couple of modules I ran, I got as PDFs, but I went and bought. So I understand where you're at, but please don't. Just try to pay for what you get so we can get more of the cool stuff. Um, as a reminder, like I said, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Happy to hear from you. I will engage with you directly over what I have here. Ooh, my stats say I'm dropping a lot of frames. That can't be good. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna shake my head back and forth. Maybe I'm good. Looks like I'm good now. All right. What is the role of the DM? DM or GM? By the way, I know we sometimes can't say DM. I'm old. I'm being old. It's hard for me not to say it. So, what is the role of DM? Well, that's probably the biggest question because the role of DM comes down to what the players want. Um, but I kind of think of being a DM as essentially being the person that's there for the players. You're facilitating a cooperative storytelling environment. And I know that being a DM is very much like an ultimate power thing, but if you remember as a kid, you used to say, "Oh man, I can't wait to be a parent so I can make my kids do all the work for me." But then when you became a parent, you kind of realize that's not how that works. Being a DM, yes, you have all the power over life and death for your players. However, you're also responsible for your players because we play this game to have fun. And if you're killing your players and they're not having fun, guess what? They're going to leave and you don't have a game. Now, I, I don't enjoy that. My first DM played very much like that. Um, and I didn't enjoy it then. I quit, in fact, for like I think almost 15 years. I played other types of games. I went from D&D to playing well, Vampire the Masquerade, White Wolf games, a handful of other things in between. But the simple fact is that as a player or as a DM, your role is to facilitate the story. It's cooperative storytelling with your players. Now, a big part of that, the role of DM, is getting the expectations from the players. So, for example, before a game starts, a lot of people talk about having a session zero, but nobody's really quite sure what a session zero is. One of the things that you want to pay attention to in a session zero is setting expectations to make sure that the expectations of the players align with each other and align with what you're willing to do. We'll get to that later. But a big part of knowing that is being the person who facilitates fun. It's not just knowing the rules, which honestly aren't that important to know, They're useful to know, but you can also make a lot of stuff up and get away with it. It's not about knowing what's going to happen next in the story, because if you're halfway decent at improving, you can figure it out without having to do that. It's really about maintaining a connection between the players and the game itself. So let's take a look at what our next question is. And this is kind of an important one. By the way, again, I'm switching slides. I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, go ahead, throw them in the chat. I will answer those with priority. I'm happy to. So what is the role of the player? Well, kind of like the DM's role is to facilitate play, the role of the player is to participate in the story, which seems silly. You might be thinking to yourself, but I'm playing, so I'm participating in the story. That's not necessarily true. I know that one of the things that people argue about is whether story structure should be on rails and we follow something, or whether it should be more open world or freeform. Well, tackle that in your session 0. But also, as a player, if the whole party's like, hey, we're going to go on this adventure, follow this dwarf, and see if we can find the lost treasure, don't you just be like, I don't want to go. Because there's going to be a bunch of players at that table who are looking at you going, okay, what are you going to do? You're like, I don't know. The DM will just run side quests for me while I'm here. I'm going to skip this one. I'll see you guys later. No, that's why? I don't get it. Like, your job as a player is to participate in the story. It may not be the adventure you want to go on, but don't expect everybody else to stop for you. Don't break the game because you don't feel like doing this thing or it isn't tailored for you. And a part of that comes from preference. As a DM, this is a personal preference. This is not anything special. But as a personal preference, I prefer players that don't have a lot of backstory. I actually encourage my players not to write any backstory before we start, because what I want them to do is I want them to use the creation of their character to create the backstory, like, right there, and then we create story forward from it. It's called front story. So you create a concept of who your character is, but you really let them come into their own and develop as you play them, and you figure out who they are. If you've ever been a writer, this happens a lot. I was writing a book, and I got about 50,000 words into it, and I realized that I didn't know what was happening next because my characters had taken on a life of their own that I was writing, and they were making choices. Even though the words were coming out of my head, I didn't know who they were when I started writing them, and those choices were different than I had actually planned out in the story map. So it's good to do that with your character as well. Also, personal preference, if you have a lot of backstory, one of the problems that you run into is that with a lot of backstory, you have a tendency to be totally focused on realizing all of the things that are happening in your backstory, and you don't focus on what's happening in the story in front of you. So you're just waiting for that thing to happen that engages you. So what is the role of the player? To be a part of the story. As a DM, you need to know that's their role. And if a player is causing problems or is causing issues at the table, you need to speak with them and be like, hey, listen, you're a friend of mine, or I like you, or whatever your relationship is with them. Here's the deal. What you're doing is holding other people back and stopping them from having fun. Is there something I can do to work with you to make this better? Or do you want to take a break from playing for a while? We can hold your spot, things like that. But this isn't for you. This isn't for you. And there are some games, by the way, out there, stepping off of that, there are some games that are not for you. I personally am not a fan of the hack and slash kill everything game, or the zombie survival games. I bet they're really fun. They're probably pretty neat, but I kind of like just a lighthearted story. I mean, in the last game where I played as a player, I played a Goliath barbarian who didn't talk much, and ended up with a pet cockatrice because I didn't want them to kill it because I was sick of violence. I mean, I like to have fun, and that's the kind of play style, and my players know that. If somebody's not fitting with my play style, all right, I'm gonna say, I'm sorry, man. I like you, but this isn't working. So you got to be honest with your players. So, obligatory slide things out there. Again, if you have questions, put them in the chat. Let me know. I'm gonna even take a break real quick for a drink of this Water. Good thing I brought backup water. Um, so, all right, we got a quick question here. Hey, Rhino Dino, I recognize that. Um, so you say, so I've never run a game. I find it intimidating. I worry about problem players and what to do when the unexpected happens. I'm going to read the whole thing, but then I'm going to go back and break it down. I hear the word improv, and I'm not sure how to deal with that. That's causing anxiety for me, so I'm wondering what advice you have. Okay, that is a great question. I'm going to break that down into the parts of into the parts that it is in order. Never run a game. Yeah, that's super intimidating. It is absolutely terrifying. First thing I would do is I would run one shots, run the same one shot 4 or 5 times, because if you do that with different people, you'll get a feel. First off, you'll know the one shot inside and out and know what's going to happen. But but by doing a one shot, there's no pressure to keep a long term story going, and you'll get a feel for your players, your cadence, things like that. So that's a good start for running a game. Is pick something that's low stakes. Pick it with friends, like family gatherings. When we have people around for family gatherings, I'll say like turkey time is over, Thanksgiving. Who wants to go kick in some doors and kill some dragons? And we'll run a quick one shot that I get from like DM's Guild or from the books or something like that, and it's fun. You can also go on to D&D Beyond. They have one shots if you do a search for encounter of the week, and those are much shorter. It's like one. I'd say it's maybe like 2 pages of reading, and they only take like a half hour to an hour to run, depending on how combat goes. If it's got combat, so those are real low stakes. You can run those at lunch if you wanted to. So you find it intimidating? Yes, it can be. Public speaking is intimidating. Putting yourself out there is intimidating. If you're comfortable as a player, you should be comfortable as a DM. All you do is have more voices in your head. I worry about the problem players and what to do when the unexpected happens. Well, let's start with problem players. The reality is that dealing with problem players is easy and difficult at the same time. What's easy about it is it's a simple matter of sitting them down and saying, "Hey, this is a problem." The problem is it's really hard to sit somebody down and say, "Hey, this is a problem," because you have to have confrontation with them. You have to have that adult conversation. And as adults, most of us will do anything we can to avoid that. And I and it's difficult. It really is. It's almost like breaking up with somebody, how you dread it forever. And there's a lot of things that people have done. I've done them. I've made it uncomfortable for the player to play, which was really awful to do because I was making somebody else miserable when I could have just been honest. An example, though, recently is I had a player who was very gung ho. He was a problem player in the sense that he was eating up all the oxygen in the room when we played. There's 5 total players playing, and this player was essentially treating everybody else like chess pieces. Where he's like, okay, Bard, you go do this. Okay, Artificer, you do that. Okay, fighter, be here and like use this power and all this other stuff. He was essentially like playing all the characters like a tactical game and not giving anybody a voice. And instead of saying, "Hey, dude, you're being a jerk," I said, "Hey, you sound like a really great leader. What if instead of telling people where to go, you inspired people by saying, 'Hey, Bard, do you have a skill that would be helpful in this situation?' Or, 'Hey, fighter, how do you think we should handle this fight?'" And I confronted a problem player, not by telling them what you're doing is wrong, because people immediately shut down when you say that to them. Instead, I said, "Hey, you have the right idea, but what if we looked at a different way of implementing it?" I didn't say it was making people uncomfortable, even though I was getting complaints. What I did is I just said, "You're on the right track. We could improve by doing this." And that's it's a lower confrontation way of meeting, of having that talk with somebody. When the unexpected happens, the unexpected always happens. I guarantee you. It's a joke between one of my ongoing campaigns and myself. Is I'm like, "Hey guys, I've got this really great idea. We're gonna go do this thing. I can't wait to see how you guys blow it out of the water and screw me up." Because the unexpected will always happen, but the key is to say yes and. Spoilers, by the way, for Waterdeep Dragon Heist. If you haven't run it, I will tell you that there's a heist and there's a dragon involved. That's a spoiler. It's in the title, so it's not too much of a spoiler. When you get to the point where you're dealing with the dragon, the book has all these ideas of how you can deal with the dragon. You can fight it. You can blah 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 blah. The one thing I was not prepared for the last time I ran it was my players offered the dragon a job. That's not in the book. I was following the book. We were doing the book stuff. Book, 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 book. I wasn't making a new thing up. I was following the book. I should have had all my answers there in the module, except my players offered the dragon a job. I'm like, okay, what's a gold dragon going to do in this situation? And I said, yes. He took the job. So they now have a dragon on staff in their world in Waterdeep. It made sense. But they came up with a crazy idea, and I said yes. And I have a player who has an artificer in my current campaign that I'm running, and he wanted to essentially make an Arnold Schwarzenegger style grenade launcher. I'm like, well, dude, that's going to take you a couple levels because I'm not just going to hand that to you at level 3. Well, he's level 7 now. He made it, and I'm like, it wasn't abusive of it. He's not using it like throwing fireballs every time because essentially it's a fireball cannon. But they were infiltrating a slave camp, and this is in Eberron, and they get to the camp, and they come up inside the camp. They tunnel through, and they get there, and he's like, "I'm going to use my grenade launcher and fire it at each one of the guard towers." I'm like, okay. I didn't have an encounter planned for the guard towers. I figured they were going to sneak into the camp, do the thing they needed to do, and get back out without causing a ruckus because they were way outnumbered. No. Turns out, no, he wants to fire a grenade in all the directions. He wants to hit 7 guard towers. I'm like, okay, we're going to roll a skill check for each one. You're going to make a shot. I think he missed 2 of them, but he did enough damage that he incapacitated the ability for those guards, those guard towers, which I hadn't even planned in an encounter to be a thing. I'm like, yes, good job, dude. You blew up the guard towers. You really took out the camp's defenses. That's how you improv. It's just say, yes, you can do it. What would the logical next step be? For example, if you're a bartender and you have a bunch of rowdy dudes come in to your bar and they order drinks and then they start a fight. I mean, I worked in bars. I know that you're going to throw them out. Say they're super powerful fighters and they're adventurers and whatnot. There's no reason your bartender isn't a bartender because he's a retired adventurer and can whoop them. Have him whoop them right out of the bar. It's that simple. Improv, just yes. And what would happen in reality? So, if you're not sure how to deal with that, I don't know, man. There's skills out there you can do, but you improv as a player. You're given a situation every day as a player, and you're told, hey, um, there's a wagon overturned and there's arrows in it. What are you gonna do? What do you do? Like in that situation, you just came up with an answer, so you're just doing it on the other end with more voices in your head. By the way, when I say voices in your head, you don't have to do the voices. In some cases, actually doing voices is kind of offensive the way people do them. I try to say, hey, this person has this type of accent, or this person sounds like this character that you should all recognize, or whatever. I do voices sometimes, but I've tried to get away from them because as immersive as they can be, they can also be just as distracting. Plus, it's hard for me to remember all the voices. I literally had a chart with, like, this person sounds like this character, and then I'd have to, like, in my head, I'd have to do a couple practice phrases. So it's causing you anxiety. Anxiety is real. Anxiety is normal. It's okay. I deal with anxiety all the time. Totally okay. So it's causing you anxiety, and wondering what advice I have. Well, that's my advice. You got 10 minutes worth of it. I hope that helps out a little bit. Also, Rhino Dino, I don't know why, but either I recognize the name or something, but it's a great name. And again, before I go back to the slide I have up, if anyone has any questions, throw them into the chat. Always happy to hear. I like answering those more than the pre-made ones I have. So, what are NPCs? And I'm glad I helped. What are NPCs, and how important are they to story progression? Well, NPCs are your standard non-player characters, but one of the things that a lot of players run into is this. In psychology, it's something called personal fable, which is the idea that everybody else stops when you're not looking at them. Like when I go to school, everyone's there to hang out with me or talk to me or interact with me. When I go home, they may go home, but they're just waiting until they see me again. That's personal fable. And we don't think about that a lot, but that's actually how a lot of players treat their NPCs. Oh, we went off and we did this adventure, and the company commander or whatever the story hook you have is just sitting back at the base twiddling his thumbs. No, I mean, things happen to NPCs when you're not around, and you know, using that is a good way to keep the story progressing. I had an NPC get pregnant when the adventurers were off, and they were super confused by that because they thought the only way anyone got pregnant in the world of D&D and gaming was if their bard did it. But no, they all suddenly got invested in this NPC who was pregnant, and it was really neat. Um, so yeah, NPCs, as far as NPCs in the party, should be important to help the story happen. I'll sometimes use a weak NPC in the party that's usually a level or two lower than the players because I don't want the NPC to ever outshine the players, but I also don't want them to rely on the NPC. So I have a party where there's no healers. That's my Eberron party. Um, the bard has um, has like cure wounds. That's it. That's their healer. It's a bard. Um, not a strong healer. And so they have a cleric who joined the party, but the cleric's 3 levels below them. So they're facing monsters that like one shot is gonna kill the cleric. It's not something they can rely on, but it offsets the problem. And the thing is that the NPC that's the cleric is also the MacGuffin. They have to keep the NPC safe and get the NPC back to the quest giver and MacGuffin accomplished. In fact, the NPC's name is actually Hunter MacGuffin. I told you I'm kind of silly. So NPC and story progression are important, but making sure that what your NPCs are adding doesn't take away from the players. So they should move the story along, but they shouldn't be the story. And one thing to be careful of is NPCs are not your players. It's actually best if the players forget the NPCs are there when things are happening because they don't want to be like, oh, we go to petition the king for the thing we need. And okay, you petitioned the king. We're going to have the NPC talk to the king. Great. As DM, here I am talking to myself, which is always my favorite thing to do. I think you should give us a thing. Why do you think I should give you the thing? Because we need the thing. Why do you need the thing? That gets ridiculous. You shouldn't have NPCs. It's funny when it happens a few times, but if your players are relying on the NPCs, then you're not engaging them in the story. So they need to. It's good to have them, but it's also good to take them away. Plus, nothing gets a party charged up like killing one. Oh my god! And don't ever kill the dog. Okay? Never kill the dog. Never. Your players will hate you. So that's the biggest piece of advice. Um, okay, so this is one I got when I was doing the podcast more often than not. And again, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Happy to answer them. Who is more important, the player or the DM? Depends on which side of the table you're on. Yeah, never kill the dog. Um, who is more important? Well, the players, honestly, because as a DM, you're going to have this inflated ego that you are God in this world and they have to do what you tell them. Except if your players stop showing up, you've got no game. So it's a collaborative storytelling is really what gaming should be in my world. That's all personal to me, but in my world, it's collaborative storytelling, and um, you can't play without the players. but you're also not totally beholden to them. I, as a DM, there are certain rules I have, and back to kind of what I talked about with session zero. I don't. I have a personal rule which is no killing kids. As a DM, I don't kill kids. If my players start killing kids, I'm gonna stop the game and be like, "All right, guys, we're out. We're gonna stop what we're doing now. I'm gonna fast forward. This is a problem. We're not doing it." And I'm not gonna like plot armor it. I'm just gonna say when they start to do this, I'm like, no, I'm not gonna let them roll. I'm not gonna let them attack. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna do it. It's just a personal thing for me. I have 3 kids. I like them. I, it wasn't a problem before I had kids. That changed in my life, but that's why it's important to have that communication. That's collaborative storytelling because they know that's a line for me, and other players have lines. I've had a player who was a survivor of an alcoholic parent. Well, what do we do in every D&D story? It starts off in a tavern with somebody getting drunk and getting into a fight. Well, guess what? My player wasn't keen on that because somebody getting drunk and getting into a fight was their childhood, and they didn't want to. They wanted a game to get away from that stuff. So, we went to a tavern. That was great. They would get into instead of a fight, they would get into a poker game, or they would get a skill contest of some sort, and we would do that. And you don't have to shy away from it, but you don't have to tell them to suck it up. It's being a compassionate, empathetic person. I know for some people that's difficult, but it's a real thing. And actually, that's actually a good point to talk about the safety kit. Safety kit is a thing that's kind of come out, and God, I wish I was better at keeping links. The safety kit is a concept where, sorry, did I just screw up my thing? No, good. Um, Safety kit is a thing where you, as a human, essentially say to your players, "Hey, here's the deal." Um, and I'll get it into the links later. I'm sorry, I don't have it. I don't have it immediately available. I should have had it up. So the safety kit is a thing where it says, "Hey, there's a thing called an X card. You can either say it to me in a private chat in a virtual game, or you can say it and you can point to it in the game. And that's when you say, I'm uncomfortable. And me as a DM, I'll say, all right, hold on. Sorry. The person, I'm not going to say, hey, Steve's uncomfortable with this. Everybody stop. Cut it out. Steve's uncomfortable. No. I'll be like, all right, guys, I'm going to take back that thing I just said, and I'm going to move to another thing. So, for example, the bar thing. If I'm like, okay, guys, we arrive at, Watering Hole is the town we come to. And everyone's like, all right, cool, let's go to the tavern. And I'm like, yeah, we go to the tavern, and, it's free beer night. And the person's like, yeah. I'm like, and it is the darts tournament tonight. And everyone's like, yay. I'm like, I'm taking it back. We're going to do darts tournament instead. Okay, cool. That's a way of being there with your players because you support them, they support you. It's a really great way to be about it. All right, so if you have anything that you want to add, or any questions that you have, or any advice, go ahead and throw that in there. How many different types of game styles are there? By the way, I took these from questions I got when I started doing podcast. Infinite. I say that there's a handful of okay, so you can have a dungeon crawl, you can have a story based game. I've seen there was a game I had to piece out from when I did a session zero with the group. They seemed energetic, younger, and I hate to sound like an old fogey. There's kids these days, but they were energetic and they were having fun. But I realized in the first session of the game that their idea of what they wanted in the game was essentially fantasy roleplay. And I'm not talking like sword and board shields fantasy. I'm talking fantasy. And that was not my thing. So I was like, all right, guys, have fun. I'm out. Um, so you also have horror games where you're dealing with like Cthulhu kind of things like that. You have resource games where okay, your airship has crashed in the desert and you need to survive and get out by this time, or it's a zombie apocalypse or whatever. You have political intrigue games, um, fighting games. You have Monster of the Week games. You have all those different types of games you could run. There's as many styles of game out there as there are players and groups. And as a DM who runs multiple campaigns, I got 3 ongoing campaigns right now. There are 3 different styles of games with each one of them. One party is like an Exhibitions Incorporated, like, let's just goofily do something this week that's unrelated to everything we've done before. Another one is like a very seriously like political intrigue game where they're like decisions matter and notes need to be taken and little things snowball into war. That's kind of a big deal game. And then the other game I have is just a bunch of people who kick in doors, kill monsters, and tell dirty jokes. It's classic D&D. Um, so yeah, yeah. Actually, so style. Rhino Dino, you say, imagine that the style is dependent upon the players and what interests them, right? Yeah, I mean it is, but it's also dependent on what the DM is willing to put in. I'm lazy, so I tend to say, let's do a module or something that I really know, and then if we like where the game is at when we finish the module and we go a little beyond it, we'll keep going because people get bored with their characters. So level 7, they're like, oh my god, I've been playing this guy for 52 weeks. Yeah, you have, and great, or however long it takes you to get there. Um, I find that most people at 30 weeks or 30 sessions of playing their character in a long running campaign are bored and they want to do something else. They like building up their character, but they also get itchy, you know? So what I'll do is I'll run a module and I'll build off of it, or I'll take a book. Um, I know a guy who runs a campaign where his campaigns are actually episodes of Batman the Animated Series converted into play form. You know, as long as you have like a module somewhere. I have created things completely from scratch, and those were an absolute nightmare. But the thing is that my interest as a DM has to be there to keep telling the story. If I'm bored with the story, all right, guys, you killed the people in slave camp. All right, DM, where are we going next? I don't know. Where do you guys want to go? Well, what's the next crisis? What's the thing? Do you want to go kill another slave camp? Like that's not going to cut it. Like nobody's going to want to play that game. If I'm not interested in what's happening, as a DM, I'm not going to be able to deliver anything for the players. I love to steal from things that I've seen before. My Eberron campaign is quite literally a ripoff of 2 of the novels, and with Raiders of the Lost Ark thrown in there. So that's kind of fun. My other campaign that I'm running is a um, hey, how's it going, Dungeon James? My other campaign is Waterdeep, but with a twist. So like that kind of thing. It's got to be, but the style for how we play is dependent on the players and what they're looking for. Because I ask my players, I'm like one of my groups is kind of loose and they show up when they can. Um, they show up when they can, and then we just kind of do whatever. Like we just kind of fall into it. Another group is like super hardcore. Like I said, they're taking notes, so you got to balance those things. All right, so Matthew Raccoon says currently building homebrew that rips off combination of late Qing Dynasty China and Korea series called Aaron Soda Chan. Oh, that sounds awesome. Let me know. I would. Ooh, dropping frames. All right, hold on. Sorry. Okay. Ooh, that's sweet. Um, that's awesome. That sounds interesting to me. The There's a lot going on. I mentioned Session Zero. Yeah, talk about Session Zero. What does it mean for you? What is the purpose of Session Zero? That's a great question. So a Session Zero is depending on how you prep your game before you start. A Session Zero is when you have your players sit down, and I used to let my players pitch characters before we started, and then I would just just shoehorn them all together and be like, "You're a party," which I realized was problematic story wise. So what I do is during session 0 now, I ask the players to create the character with each other. And then one player's like, "Oh, hey, what if we were like cousins or brothers or something? Oh, that'd be really cool." And like all this other stuff. And they kind of find a mesh, and I'm like, "Okay, where do we want to start?" Well, like my Waterdeep campaign, I said it's a little weird. They are a troop of escaped like like lesser races, I guess, which is a horrible thing to say. Um, but there's a goblin, a kobold, a um, a turtle, and I don't know, I forget what. Oh, a tiefling, and they're all like they were essentially like slaves of an entertainer, uh, and then now they're running Skull Manor, but they're essentially running it as a like an entertainment bar, not like a bar, but like they've hired a half orc drag queen who runs wrestling sessions out of their bar. The session 0 is how we established that level of goofiness as we were playing. We created the backstory that everybody has together. We created their goals together. But session 0 is also where you can talk about your rules, your home, your everyone has their own house rules. Very few people are truly raw because raw RAW is rules is written, because there's a handful of rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide that talk about the rule of cool, which is if it's cool, okay, or if it's fun, if the DM likes it or the players like it or whatever, run it. For example, I always tell my players when a monster is bloody, below half hit points. It's a fourth edition thing. I don't even know where I picked it up because I never played fourth edition, but I still say, okay, yeah, this creature's bloodied now. It doesn't even have a mechanical effect on a fifth edition game, but I still do it. I don't know why. But many of my house rules are if you're uncomfortable. So if you're playing something that's outside of your realm, for example, I have a one player who's a bard. She's not a performer, but she really likes the idea of being a performer. She's like, I sing them a song. I'm not gonna be like, okay, sing the song. Her eyes would go huge in panic. Session 0 kind of was how I got to know her well enough to realize she's like, "Hey, can I play a bard?" I'm like, "Yeah, no reason why you couldn't play a bard." She's like, "I'm not comfortable performing." I'm like, "Okay, I won't ask you to." And she's like, "Oh, thank you." Like that's where we understood each other. And then what I like to do when I do session 0s is after we do character creation, what I'll do is I'll run a one shot that's not related to the campaign, so the players can kind of flesh out their characters. They can get a feel for how they built them, what they'll use, that kind of stuff. And I usually run one of those encounter of the weeks because it can run a little long. You create the characters, you talk, you discuss. Um, if you're going to play a module, that's where you guys decide what you're going to play. If you're playing a homebrew, that's where you introduce them to their world. And if you're doing a homebrew world, one thing I recommend is it's not fragile. Ask them for feedback, because if they become invested in it, they're gonna be much more engaged players, and that's gonna be a big part. So session 0 is essentially where you bring everybody together and you say, "Hey, what do you expect of me? Here's what I expect of you. What are we going to do going forward? Here are the rules we're going to follow." That's when you can introduce the safety kit if you want to use it. That's when you can talk about your expectations. I have my own little like home house rule list, which is mostly like behavior rules. I'm against power gaming. My rules essentially just be excellent to each other. As long as you guys are cool with each other, I'll generally do most things like no stealing from other players, no creating drama in the party, because I'm not here to. I got kids, man. I don't need to sort out other people fighting. Like I got enough of that. So those are my rules. That's kind of what you establish in the session 0. Test game, yeah. Using a test game is great. Um, yeah, it gives people. So Ranodino says, "I like the idea. Test game. Use the mechanics. and house rules so people get a feel for the game and people playing. Yes. Also, if you have new players, here's a neat trick. I like to tell my players that are new that I'm superstitious. I'm very superstitious. So what I do is I take all of my dice and I line them up with the highest number up. This way, they'll learn to roll lucky with the highest number up. And that's what I tell the new players. But what I'm not telling them is, hey, if you put the D8 with the side 8 up, if you put, I don't even care what they think the highest number is. With a D10, it's 0, but, you know, I don't want to fight with people about that. So they got the D4 with the 4 up. They got, the cube with the 6 up. They got the 8 with the 8 up, the 12 with the 12 up, the 10s, those, the 20. Then when I'm like, hey, roll a D8, they just look at their dice and they go, oh, which one has the 8 up? Oh, okay, I'll take that one. There's nobody going, which one's the D8 again? Because they're all just messy in here. Because but I tell them it's a superstitious thing, and they do it, and they think it's cute and funny, but the next thing you know, they're looking at all their dice with the number up. And it saves time and embarrassment for the player. So, yeah. It teaches them which one's which. And you can tell people to put them in order by number, but they got to know which one's which, and then they feel silly looking at them trying to find the highest number. Another trick that's useful, and let me see if I have any big dice here, is, sorry, off camera. Technical difficulties, folks. Here's the secret. You don't need to necessarily find the 20. Ooh, this is going to be ugly on camera. Didn't think of this ahead of time, did I? The 1 is the flip side of the 20. On the D6s, the 1 is the flip side of the 6. A couple other dice are useful. Obviously, some of the triangular dice, it's not as useful. But on the big ones, the 1 is the opposite of the 20. So I always like to tell people, if you find the 1, just flip it over, and you usually have the other number. And by the way, Dwarf is a really good Dwarf in the Discord chat is really awesome at explaining mathematics. I am not Dwarf. I cannot explain mathematics. So yeah, that's a good way as a DM to just help out new players without being obvious. Be like, hey, dummy, these are the dice. No. Also, Wizards of the Coast has a really nice little chart that you can print off for people that tells you which die is which by shape, and it's pretty useful. I got it with some of my DMs, my young adventurers guide stuff for my kids. So, okay, this one I have to talk about. This is the one that freaks everybody out about being a DM. How is preparation and note-taking important as a DM? Well, I'm terrible at it. Here we go. This is my notes for the next 3 sessions of my game coming up. It is 1 post-it note. I have tried a million different ways to keep notes. If you're going to keep notes and you're good at it, find a way that works. Google Docs and then like hypertext within the Google Docs. Super awesome. I've tried it a few times. I usually get about 12 sessions in before I just give up. I usually just have a quick cheat sheet of, like I said, character, voices, who's who kind of thing. There's many great stuff out there. Digital DM, if you do a search for Digital DM in OneNote, that guy has amazing templates for using Microsoft OneNote to create notes and guides, and it's a lot. It's too much. I actually rely a lot on my players. I'm like, hey, you guys meet the shifter you guys met back in the day, and one of my players, like, I hear notes flipping. It's like, you mean Chance Silverclaw? I'm like, yes, that guy. So I rely on my players for some of the information. And because I'm often playing off of what my players are doing, I don't need to keep notes because they move the story, and then I just shape it to what they're doing. So, like, I have an idea coming up that, okay, my players are going to go back to the conclave, and there's going to be some sort of explosive incident, and they're going to have to go from there. I don't know what the explosive incident's going to be. I don't know who's going to be killed. I don't know, like, who's going to be responsible, because my players haven't told me who they're going to go talk to. I can't be like, you guys go back to the conclave. Make sure you go talk to John Smith over there because he's going to be a big thing. because my players are going to be like, okay, are you playing or are we playing? But if I'm like, hey guys, you get back to the conclave, you have this important piece of information you want to pass on. Who are you going to go pass it on to? And they're like, oh, we're going to go pass it on to the head of, the Siri delegate from Sire in Eberron. Like, okay, cool. While you're there, you overhear this conversation, and it sounds like they're plotting some sort of like, you know, attack on the delegation. Oh, okay, cool. That's not note taking. I had an idea of a thing that was going to happen, and then the note taking I come from is essentially I'm like it's going to be these you're going to face off against these things, or you're going to have to find this thing or overcome that thing. I know people who take a ton of notes. They could write a book on everything they take. In fact, if you like the Expanse TV series, that was literally taken from the DM's notes, who was running that game, and then turned it into a book series and then a TV series. That was a tabletop game that got turned into something amazing. So I think it was James Corey is the author, but yeah, it's up to you. Planning ahead, you like I said before, your players are gonna break everything you throw at them, so just be prepared. I mean, if you decide your players need to fight this guy, okay, does he have to show up where you had him, or can he show up in response to something else, or can your players do something stupid and get brought to him, or it's like having children. Like I said, I have three of them, and I've been a teacher, and I have found that if I tell students read this, and they're gonna 40% of them are gonna actually read what I tell them to. Another 30% of them are gonna like skim over it, read the headline, like read the chapter headers, and maybe the bolded words and move on. Another 30% are just gonna be like, no. Mm-mm. But if I'm like, hey, we're gonna be doing a challenge tomorrow, and you'll find the information in this chapter that'll help you. That'll help you defeat the challenge. Well, guess what? All of my kids read it. It's that simple. If I tell my kids, hey, I want you guys to if I tell my children I want you to do this, they're not gonna do it. If I say, hey, I want you to do something creative, they might do it. They're gonna do something. So I mean, it's all about direction and finding a way. So yeah, it's you gotta move them gently towards the goal you want. You can't just shove them and say this is the thing you're doing, except for maybe the first session. So and let your players give you feedback. Let your players help you, because first off, it takes a lot of work off of you, but second, it's nice. They feel invested in the story. So any questions before I? Any questions in general? I'm gonna take another drink while anyone thinks of any questions that they have. And I will reiterate for those of you who are joining us later: don't kill the dog. All right. Style of early D&D versus current D&D, aka survival or DM versus player mentality to player versus environment reality. Um, this I kind of covered a little earlier. Collaborative storytelling is super important. One thing though I do want to address is modeling the behavior you want to see in the world as you tell your story. If you see kindness in the world, where people are helping out, like NPCs are helping out other NPCs or coming to the aid, you're going to see your players reflect that behavior. If you're modeling cruelty in the world, your players are going to reflect that cruelty. Um, the setting that you give your players is going to set the tone for how they play. And I model a world that honestly mirrors real life. There's consequences. So when my players get into fights, they often don't kill people, because guess what? Death is kind of permanent. Even in D&D where you can be brought back to life, death is still mostly permanent. So if you're killing like hundreds of people, if you're being a murder hobo and your players are just rolling around killing people, that's not good. It's gonna weigh on your soul. So I like to make that a reality. Like, hey, you killed a person. How do you feel about that? You know. But that's what I model for my players. Other games I've been in, as a player, I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna take my axe and I am gonna swing for the fences on this dude. And guess what? That's not what I model in my games, but I model the world I want to play in, and my players play in it. Um, I don't like to be DM versus the players. The only couple times I've ever been DM versus the players is when the players are problematic. Honestly, if it's a small problem, like I had a player who was a bard but also wanted to be a wizard, so he took a feat and he got a spell, and essentially what he did is he took polymorph and he was polymorphing himself into a giant gorilla. I'm like, okay, dude, if you wanted to, in every fight he was doing this, like if you wanted to play a druid, play a druid. This is not the way to go about it. And suddenly he would go to polymorph himself, and guess what would happen? Oh no, they cast counterspell. Oh, they made the save. Oh my, oh man, that sucks. You just blew a high level spell slot. All right, well your turn's over. Next. And after the third or fourth time this happened, it was kind of passive aggressive of me to do it that way, but he caught on, and that's really the only time I've ever done like DM versus players. I generally like to help my players be a part of the story. What do I have next? How to DM a dungeon crawl when one or more players are RP driven? Is there a balance to find there? Okay, so with role play driven stories, um, you can still role play in a dungeon crawl. It's totally possible. Um, it's just a matter of doing. When I say dungeon crawl, I'm talking like a long dive where the players are going to be down there for like multiple long rests. They have to set watches, that kind of thing, where it's not just, hey, they're bouncing town to town. Yeah, does the dungeon have a backstory? Yes, actually. Why the hell is the dungeon there? Who put a dungeon there? Like, it's like women in legs willy nilly handing out swords to leadership. Why do people just leave dungeons there? There's a reason it's there, and actually, that's one of the reasons I love playing in Eberron, is because there's such a rich history of the civilizations that came before Eberron. So you go pull that sword out, and it's like a +2 sword that you got from this huge dungeon dive, and his. But to the goblins, that's the sword of their king, and they're gonna be pissed when they see you just waving that thing around, because to them, you just robbed the tomb of one of their great ancestors. It'd be like if you went into like the tomb of the unknown soldier and you pulled out a saber, and you're like, "Yes, I got a saber." People are gonna be pissed. So yeah, dungeons have a backstory. Um, like Dungeon of the Mad Mage in Faerun has a heck of a backstory. That thing is wild. Like that totally undermines how normal Waterdeep is. It's totally um, normal on the normal on the streets and real weird underneath. So it's important to let your players roleplay. For example, in the dungeon crawl, okay, you guys get attacked by trolls. Well, set them on fire, chop them up. Okay, cool. Um, but then what happens if you come across troll babies? Like that's where everybody pauses. They're like, oh, oh, like oh no, you guys got attacked by wolves. You find pups that can't fend for themselves. Oh, oops. You know, or in a dungeon, I had a player who was claustrophobic, and they weren't role playing it as they were totally like paralyzed by it, but they were very much role playing it where their character, who was a melee fighter, felt boxed in and would end up switching to ranged, pulling themselves off the front line, even though it wasn't their specialty, because the player's character did not like being around, like being having everything around them and feeling even more boxed in when they're underground. So they can do it. Just facilitate it. Honestly, work with your players, see what they have to say. So I want to be respectful of your time. If anybody, this was supposed to be a 1 hour session, and I don't want to. If you've got somewhere else to be, I obviously don't want to hold you any longer than I need to. I want to make sure that you can get to the games that you have. If any of you have any like last second questions, I can try and answer them in a short answer, which I've already proven I'm not good at. So without anything, Bueller, Bueller, you can catch me on Twitter as I have a very creative Twitter name. Ooh, um, Valentine. I do have a role. I do have to roll, but I hear you need a host for your podcast. I have some ideas. If you're interested, yeah, I will definitely hit you up. In fact, I am copying that right now. I am trying to copy that right now, and oh, there it is. It worked. I will start in my thing. Yeah, I'd be interested if I'd like to get it going. I mean, honestly, it's Corona time, so none of us are doing anything right now. But yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Mr. _Espinos. It's a very creative Twitter handle. It came from being a teacher. That's what my kids called me. You can also find me on, yeah, you can find me in the Discord session. Um, you can find it as Mike Zazu Espinos, and you can find me here on Twitch. Direct, if you're on Twitch, obviously you know how to find me. Valentine 9K here. So reach out to me. Happy to hear from you. Thank you guys for showing up. I know some of you came and went. Great discussion. I'm glad you guys threw in some great questions in there. And have a good Kobold Con, everybody. Bye.